In a moment.
Good evening. Welcome back to our election night coverage with Howard K. Smith and Harry Reasoner. I'm Barbara Walters, bringing you the results this year in the different races. We'll take a look now, first of all, of what the popular vote is, what the national popular vote is, with 61% of the precincts reporting. Carter has 51% of the vote and almost 26 million votes, and Ford has 48% of the votes with some 24 million. And the electoral, Carter is leading. He has 224 votes. Ford has 124, and 270 are needed in all. And that's the way the overall view is right now. Harry can give us another view of it.
It's interesting to look at that on a colored map of the United States, which we have been keeping up through the evening with the states where ABC News has made a projection. The darker color, the blue, are states that have gone for Carter. The lighter color, the yellow, the states that have gone for Ford. As you can see, the South, except for Mississippi, which is still in doubt, was extremely solid for Jimmy Carter. And the big underpopulated areas of the western Midwest and the mountain states and the plains are almost solidly for Gerald Ford. Ford made his inroads in the Northeast, in New Jersey, and in part of New England and Connecticut. And Jimmy Carter took New York, the second of the 41 electoral votes in New York. What we're dealing with now, however, is the fact that it's early yet on the West Coast, too early to call those elections in states like California, and that there are a lot of stubborn states which refuse to commit themselves left in the Middle West and even one in the East. I'm dealing with Iowa, for instance. 98% of Iowa's precincts have been counted, and it remains 49% to 49%. At the moment, Gerald Ford has pulled ahead. He's got a fairly high 49% of nearly a 4,000 vote lead over Jimmy Carter. That difference in Iowa could be one of the cases where Eugene McCarthy held the balance of power. Texas, 74% of the precincts in Texas have reported. Jimmy Carter has been holding a 51 to 48% lead, 1,300,000 to 1,200,000. But Texas is too close to call. Wisconsin, the other Midwest state that I'm watching, 55% of the precincts in, a 4% lead for Jimmy Carter, 51 to 47%, but no verdict. Barbara?
Harry, we have, ABC has a projection in New Mexico with 4 electoral votes. New Mexico has gone for Ford, and that's a close election. But what is particularly interesting about the state of New Mexico is that it has voted for the winner in every presidential election since it became a state in 1912. And they have gone for Ford. This may break their record, then again, they may have another winning year. Harry talked about California, and from what we can tell so far, looking at the key precincts that we are watching in particular, it is still 50-50 in California. There's no way of telling now which way the vote is going. Ford supposedly had an edge in that state, but it's 50-50 as right now. Mississippi is particularly interesting in the South because they had a dilemma that so many of the states in the South faced, and they have not seemed to be able to come to any conclusion yet. That is that Mississippi has Carter, who is their Southerner, who is their Southern son, and a great many people lean towards him, and yet by tradition, it is a Republican state. It hasn't voted for a Democratic presidential candidate since 1956. It's still a toss-up. It was felt that if there was a very strong black vote there, it would help Carter. But the state seems still to be struggling with which way it should go, and we're not able to call that as yet.
Barbara, Harry talked about stubborn states. Well, the two most stubborn are in the Middle West and the near Middle West, and if they voted for the same man, they could put Carter across. One is Ohio with 67th, 2/3 of the votes counted. Ford leads 50 to Carter's 48%. In Illinois, 58% of the votes counted. Carter leads 50 to 49%. Incidentally, in Illinois in 1960, John Kennedy got 50% of the votes and Richard Nixon got 49.8%, and they had to wait until late the next day to find out those figures. I hope we don't have to do it tonight.
I'd like to find out where those votes are from. In the Kennedy and Nixon election, they had a terrible time getting the votes in from Chicago because of the necessity for sending horses out to bring in the count and everything else. And it wasn't until it was known how many votes they needed from Chicago before the votes finally came in.
There was a little hanky-panky, too, Harry. They have discovered that in San Antonio, Texas, where they were waiting, too, There were some precincts where more people voted for Kennedy than there were voters in the precincts.
That's vote early and often, right? That's a...
Fortunately, all of that kind of thing has disappeared from American politics in the post-Watergate area, and there will be no more hanky-panky. We were talking a little while ago and had some audio prods. We were talking to Governor George Wallace of Alabama. We now believe, Governor, that we can speak to you and hear you, thanks to the miracles of modern electronics, without any further problems. Can you hear us?
Yes, Harry, I can hear you, folks.
Governor, I was curious about one thing. You began your career in national politics with the frequent statement that you wanted to send Washington a message. Do you think your message has gotten through in this election?
Well, I think one of the messages that I tried to send through to Washington and to the nation was that the people of our particular region were qualified to run for the presidency, and I think that the people of our nation have recognized that a long time. And I do feel it would be good for the country, and I do feel that there is a new attitude about bureaucracy and about big government.
Governor, what about your future plans? What lies ahead for George Wallace?
Well, of course, I'm still alive and in good health, and I am leaning toward the possibility of running for the United States Senate in 1978.
Against whom would that be? Would someone retire? Is Senator Sparkman going to retire?
I'm not sure. I do not mean to say that I'm announcing against Senator Sparkman. I've always supported Senator John Sparkman. He's a very good friend of mine, but I was under the impression that there's a possibility he might not. I should not impress you with the fact that I've spoken to him about it, because I have not. But if that contingency arises, of course, I certainly will lean in that direction.
Governor, there had been some talk that your wife might run for governor of Alabama. Is there still the feeling that she might? Can you tell us if there is a point of view in the family on that?
Well, of course, my wife has a very independent mind and does what she wants to do, and if she decided to run, she would run, but I don't think that she's going to run, doesn't have that in her mind, but that's a question you really have to ask her.
Do you have any opinion on it? Would you like to see it happen?
Would I like to see it happen? Well, of course, let me say that if I decide to run for the Senate, if that occasion arises, I don't know whether we'd be both running for the same thing or not. I would like to see her do whatever she wants to do.
That's very admirable, Governor. Thank you very much, and we'll look forward to seeing George Wallace at future election nights.
Thank you.
Let us bring you up to date on the electoral votes again. 224 for Governor Carter and 128 for President Ford. And electoral votes in each state are made up by adding the number of representatives in the House plus the 2 senators, and that's how you get the electoral count in each state. Well, we'll have more of our continuous election coverage right after this. Let us recap for you now the national popular vote. With 64% of the precincts in, it is Carter with almost 27 million and Ford with 25 million, 51% to 48%. Harry has a...
It's in an election this close, there are going to be a lot of arguments. They'll follow up. One of them has already started. Richard Rosenbaum, who's the New York State Republican chairman, asked for a court order late tonight to impound all of the voting machines in New York City, saying that he'd received allegations of tampering with them in some districts. He's not saying that that's so. He's just saying that, well, they check it, particularly since his man lost the state, according to our projection, that we have to have the machines under surveillance, Rosenbaum said.
Also, in this election, of course, along with the president, all 435 members of the House of Representatives are up for election, 14 governor races in the country, and 33 senators. 1/3 of the senators were running. And we have a report from Frank Reynolds to bring us up to date on what's happened in the Senate races.
Well, we have 2 races now that we are ready to project, and they are bad news for the Republicans. First of all, it's kind of historic simply because of the state itself, Nebraska. A Democrat is going to win the seat now held by Roman Ruska. Mayor Edward Zorinski of Omaha is projected, according to ABC News, as the eventual winner of that race against Republican Representative John McCollister. Very interesting story involved here. Mayor Zorinski was a registered Republican until November of 1975. Then he found out that he was not going to be able to get the Republican nomination for the Senate, so he simply switched parties and became a Democrat. The Democrats weren't wild about that. They had a bitter primary, but he won, and now he has apparently defeated the Republican odds-on favorite at the beginning of the campaign, Representative John McCollister. And we have another instance of a Republican seat being taken by a Democrat, though no incumbent is involved. This is in the grand and glorious state of Hawaii. In Hawaii, Spark Matsunaga, the Democratic candidate, now a member of the House, is projected as the winner over former Governor William Quinn by a comfortable margin. Now, also, we have only 4 states left to be decided as far as the senatorial contests are concerned. They are Ohio, Arizona, California, and Utah. And do we have a projection on Utah, Dave? Yes, we do now have a projection on Utah, and it is another instance of an incumbent being unseated. This one is kind of a surprise, too, because of the seniority. In Utah, Orrin Hatch, the Republican candidate, is going to, according to ABC News, defeat Senator Frank Moss, who is trying for his 4th term in the United States Senate. And Orrin Hatch, the Republican candidate who filed only at the very last moment, is a conservative's conservative, had substantial help from Ronald Reagan. Reagan, as a matter of fact, endorsed him in the primary, which was rather unusual for him to do. And Orrin Hatch, according to ABC News, will be the next United States Senator from Utah. That is a Republican gain, taking away 1 Democratic seat. Now we have only 3 states left to decide, and they are cliffhangers. Ohio is, of course, one of the most important ones. We have a substantial percentage of the vote in from Ohio, 71%. Howard Metzenbaum, the Democratic candidate, clinging to a rather narrow lead, 51% to 48% for the incumbent Republican Senator Robert Taft. And in Arizona, with 30% of the precincts in, we're still unable to project a winner in the contest between Dennis DeConcini, the Democratic candidate, and Republican Representative Sam Steiger. But DeConcini is leading rather handily here at this point, 58 to 42%. And the next big one is California. And California, with only 7% in, S.I. Hayakawa, he of the Tam O'Shanter fame, is leading incumbent Democratic Senator John Tunney, 53 to 44%. But that is such a big state, and we have such a small sample, that it is impossible to make a projection on that one at this point. So we have only 3 to go. And now for a report on the races for the House of Representatives, here's Don Farmer.
A couple of months ago, Congressman Guy Vanderjack of Michigan made a prediction that this year the Republicans would win 76 House seats in 76. That was a couple of months ago. About a week ago, he said, well, maybe we'll win about 15. Right now, the Republicans haven't won any. Of course, we've seen the apparent winners in all but 25 seats in the 435 there are. Right now, the Democrats are holding a net gain of 1 seat. That's a surprise. Republicans were expected realistically to get perhaps 8, 10, or 12 seats. That's the way it stands now. There still are 25 seats to be filled. We're looking at the blacks in the House. There were 17 before this election. There are still 17 for the 95th Congress. All of the incumbent blacks have won, including Harold Ford of Tennessee, that state's first black congressman. He was the only one who really had a problem. That, of course, does include Barbara Jordan and Andrew Young, Jimmy Carter's most influential black colleague. Taking a look at women in the House of Representatives, there were 19. 3 decided not to run or were defeated in primaries for higher office. Of the 16 who ran for re-election, all of them have won, and there will be, or at least are apparent winners, and there will be 2 new women in the Congress. Congresswoman Mikulski, it would appear, who has been elected in Baltimore. Congresswoman Okar, it appears, will be the new congresswoman from Cleveland. The Republican leader, John Rhodes of Arizona, has been re-elected. He'll be back. Of course, the majority leader, Tip O'Neill, the man obviously who will be the next Speaker of the House, will be back. Alan Howe, the congressman from Utah, the freshman Democrat who was arrested and convicted of soliciting prostitutes. It was expected that he would lose. Alan Howe has lost. He lost to Dan Marriott, the Republican candidate in the Salt Lake City area. So Alan Howe will not be back. And if you take a look at some of the other members of Congress who have been afflicted with various personal problems involving sex or money or some other thing, just quickly, I see that John Flint of Georgia has won re-election. Henry Helstosky of New Jersey has lost. Also having won, John Young of Texas, John Jenrette of South Carolina. A mixed bag, I think we could say, in terms of those possibly affected by scandal or some bad headlines this year. Right now, it looks as though the House will be younger than ever, but the party ratio will not change so much, and the Democrats have a firm hold on their 2-to-1 majority. Harry?
We have a projection now from the West Coast in the state of Washington with 9 electoral votes. ABC News projects that President Ford will take that state by a close margin, bringing his electoral vote total to 137. Coming up next, more of our continuous election coverage right after this.
Jimmy Carter is leading in electoral votes, 224 to Ford's 137. Sam Donaldson has been covering the Carter campaign since those early days in the primary. He's in Atlanta, Georgia now with 2 men who are very close to and very involved with Jimmy Carter. Sam?
Barbara, I'm here with Hamilton Jordan, the governor's campaign manager, and with Jody Powell, his press secretary. Mr. Jordan, what's your assessment at this point in the evening of how the race is going?
Sam, we're encouraged. There are a lot of states out yet, but among those states that are out, we have good prospects, and in many of them, we have just learned, I think, that New York is solidly in the Carter column. So we're waiting and watching and are optimistic.
Mr. Powell, what's the governor's mood tonight?
Well, he feels good, obviously. I think the first reports this morning of the very high turnout started the day right. As you know, that's always a good sign for Democrats, but beyond that, in the face of the gloomy predictions and editorials both in print and on the air about how the American people were turned off, they didn't care, they weren't going to vote, there was no interest in this election and so forth. I think the American people have spoken very eloquently in response to those and have shown that they do care, that they are interested, they were willing to come out to vote, and whether we win or whether President Ford has been reelected, that is very encouraging to us, and it was very encouraging to Governor Carter this morning, I know.
Do you have doubts about the election? Are we in a point right now where it could go either way?
Well, I suppose that mathematically it's possible for it to go either way, but just from the figures that we've seen recently, it looks as if Mr. Ford has a tough job to get to 270 from where he is now. And on the other side of the coin, our prospects are very good for reaching 270. So I wouldn't trade positions with President Ford right now, but it's mathematically possible.
Mr. Powell, I know you've been asked this question by me and others many times, but why do you think the governor's race developed into a very close one when last summer it appeared that he might be a runaway?
Well, because American presidential races traditionally are relatively close, and this was a tough race between 2 pretty good candidates, and it was bound to be close.
Thank you very much, Jody Powell and Hamilton Jordan.
Take a good look at those men, because if Governor Carter wins, you'll be seeing a lot of them. Jody Powell probably would be press secretary, and Hamilton Jordan will have some position close to President Carter if he becomes President Carter. Coming up next, more of our continuous elections coverage right after this. The popular vote stands right now. Jimmy Carter has almost 28 million, and Ford has almost 26 million, 51% for the Democrats, 48% for the Republicans. That's the National Election Night story at 22 minutes after the hour.